If you work for the Catholic Church and want to transform the culture of your parish and put more souls in the pews, we're here to help. I'm Thai Hua, here with my co-host John Cons, and this is the Catholic Ministry Professionals Podcast, your favorite leadership development podcast for Catholic churches. Each week, you can expect engaging discussions, expert interviews, and actionable advice to help you move Jesus' mission forward in your parish. Today, we're discussing the hidden bottlenecks, killing parish engagement, how to address the issues that quietly stall growth, frustrate your leaders, and keep your parish from bearing the fruit you know is possible. John, how are you?
Ty, it is a good day. I'm excited to be here recording with you once again in the online studio. How'd you like that title?
When I first saw it pop across my email, I'm like, this might be the silent killer to most organizations. Literally the silent killer. And if it doesn't kill your organization, it's going to stop you from growth. So I don't think organizations talk about this particular thing enough.
If it is talked about, it's talked about unproductively, I would say. Like, man, it is so frustrating that I can't get Father to do X, right? Or
Agreed.
It's so frustrating that this person called into the office and nobody followed up. It just is like that. When it is talked about, it's talked about in that. And the truth is, like, I agree with you. Like, I think it's a silent killer that happens. It stalls growth, like we said. But on the flip side of that, I would say that most parishes aren't dealing with a lack of faith or a lack of desire for growth. Like, the desire's there. They're dealing with the toleration of the bottleneck, right? These things have been around for so long, these problems, that they feel like, well, this is just the normal struggle of parish life. And so they just keep silent about it, or when they do talk about it, it's not productive because it's just always going to be there. But the truth is, like, I want to speak a little truth into this, a little bit of peace, a little bit of freedom, is that people aren't disengaged because they don't care. They're not disappearing from the church because they hate the church, and ministries don't flatline just because this is parish life and it's what it looks like. The reality of this issue is that it's simple and it's uncomfortable. It's that most parishes are just running on systems built for survival, not for growth. And then this creates the bottleneck, right? There's cluttered communication, unclear processes, there's inconsistent follow-up, disorganized ministries, and then just, talk about the staff who just spend their energy putting out fires instead of moving the mission forward, right? This is the whirlwind of work. But here's the kicker, is that while these bottlenecks make engagement really difficult, if not impossible, that there is really still hope. So I want to say that if we can clear these bottlenecks, if we can come up with a process, a way of addressing the issues, then we're going to see engagement rise, and we'll see it rise quickly. Because if a parish can get itself aligned, if they can clean up their communications, their process, if they can simplify what they're doing, then communication starts to land with people. The volunteers, you'll see them step forward and stick around. You'll see parishioners are going to feel seen and heard instead of lost in the shuffle, so they'll be more present. And finally, I just want to say, like, the work itself, the work for the staff is going to become more enjoyable, which is such a boon to growth, to engagement, to ministry, because they're no longer fighting for their own systems all day long. They're now operating within successful systems. And when the path is clear, the people can move forward, right? When people move, then the parish grows. So I want to turn to a quick key scripture verse here, and it's from Isaiah 57, chapter 14. Isaiah, the prophet, says, build up, prepare the way, remove every obstacle from my people's path. Those are the words of the Lord to the prophet Isaiah, and it cuts straight to the heart of this parish engagement. God doesn't just tell us to preach the path, he tells us to clear it. Like, most parishes want renewal. They pray for engagement. They want deeper discipleship, but the everyday bottlenecks, right? The confusing processes, the disorganized systems, the inconsistent follow-up, this keeps people from moving forward in their faith. It keeps people from being able to walk along the clear path. So Isaiah is really blunt. If the path is blocked, people can't move. When a parish removes the bottlenecks, though, when we clear the path, then people can finally see where to go. The staff stops burning energy, fighting their own systems, fighting the bottlenecks. Leaders are actually enabled to lead because the pathway is clear, and parishioners can feel guided instead of adrift. engagement rises because nothing is standing in the way. So again, we want to lean on the wisdom from this verse, which is very practical. It's very simple, though not necessarily always easy. It's very simple. If there's an obstacle in the people's path, we need to remove it. Amen?
Amen. One other thing I'd say too, John, is
Mhm.
it's not all on the leader to remove these bottlenecks, right? Because as a leader, you're not actually doing everything, so you can't be present in everything. So you have to be able to have a conversation with your team. Like, if there are bottlenecks, let's create this culture of accountability that we can bring it forward without alienating somebody or calling somebody out just to call them out, right? Like, if you hear somebody, I think of a trigger, like when you hear somebody say this, he or she or they or them or that team always does this, and it frustrates me because it impedes on my job. Well, when you hear somebody utter that, or when you utter that, well, the first thing you should do is document the situation. Meaning, what is the scenario? What was the context of the situation, so that when you communicate it to them, it's not just that you always do this and I hate it when you do it. It's like, well, help me out. Help me understand what am I doing? Maybe I don't realize what I'm doing. And it affects you so badly to the point where now you're adding to the toxic fire that is the complaining and the moaning and the griping without actually getting any work done. Can you actually come to me to say, hey, coming out of that meeting, you mentioned this, but really you do this, 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 and this is how it affects my team and my work. Can we work together to, you know, find some valuable results, or excuse me, valuable things that we can work together on so that it doesn't, ruin my work, but it also helps with your workflow. Now we're actually getting somewhere versus I'm just going to gripe, I'm just going to complain and rinse and repeat, right?
Absolutely. So what we need then is a process to be able to do this. Because, yeah, if you're just calling someone out in a meeting or another group out in a meeting randomly or occasionally, regularly throughout the course of your work, you're going to run into that where you're hurting feelings. But if instead the process of identifying issues and overcoming them as a group is a part of the culture, suddenly it's not like him versus her, my thing versus your thing. It's us working together in the same direction. And so we want to have a way to do this consistently, and that keeps us accountable to the mission as well. And so I think before we really are able to fix the engagement issues we have, these bottlenecks that happen, we have to name the things that are suffocating it. And so I just want to throw out some of the common bottlenecks that I've experienced when I talk with parish staffs, having been on a parish staff multiple times. And these are some of the main bottlenecks that we run into in parish life. The first, there's no clear follow-up process. And Ty, we experienced this directly when you were engaged to your now wife. You guys got engaged and you didn't have a home parish in Sioux Falls. And so you said, well, hey, let's reach out to your parish. I talked, I'm not going to call him out, but I said, yeah, man, I'd love to help you get connected here. Let's do it. And I talked to the pastor in person at my parish. And then I sent him an email, I think with a connection, and then you called directly into the office, and then you never heard anything back. And so then you found another parish, which is fine. They're lucky to have you. My parish specifically lost out on an excellent, engaged parishioner and whole family because of that. And so this lack of clear follow-up processes, that's one example. We could probably all think of 10 to 20 to 30 other options where that's been the case, where whether it's the pastor or it's the front office person or it's just Joe Schmo ministry member or Ethel running the, funeral committee or whatever, we can all think of times when this has been the case where there's been no clear follow-up process. Related to that, scattered communication, right? We're just going to throw out whatever random messages to everybody all the time, and it becomes a scattered communication instead of a very intentional and direct communication, guided and designed towards a specific end. Volunteers being inconsistently trained or supported so that you're always training your volunteers instead of having one really good training process, right? And then no matter what, somebody new comes in, it derails your whole week because you have to focus on that one thing. Staff working in silos. This is a complaint that I hear a lot, where the staff want to be working together on something in common, but they're so busy competing for resources, or their job descriptions are so outlined to keep them separate, that and their processes might be separate so much that they don't feel like they're working together. They're working on things separately in the same room. Ministry information being stored in one person's head. This is where we never get the information down on the paper so that other people can know what's going on. No tracking of attendance or intentional next steps for any of our events, because then we lose a lot of potential connections with people. Decision making often can be another one where decision making is bottlenecked at one person, often the pastor, but it could also be the liturgy director, or it could be the faith formation coordinator, or whatever it is. And then just outdated processes that no longer match the parish's needs. And I think especially as AI is coming up and as people are getting used to technology, we have a lot of outdated processes that make it hard for parishioners of a younger generation to connect with what's going on at the parish. All right. So that just kind of frames, these are the types of bottlenecks that we often find in parishes. What we're going to go through is a process for identifying and tackling these issues so that we can move the ball forward, so we can become a real engine of evangelization. So, Ty, any thoughts?
One thought, you just touched on AI.
Yes, sir.
I think was it last week we recorded on AI or the week before?
Last week.
Yeah, I had a meeting in my secular job. Gal's taking over like this huge department in this company that I work with, and she's like, "Man, I just I go from one meeting to the next. Can you email me what we talked about and follow up items and blah blah blah?" And I'm just like, number one, I'm also the same. Like, I go from meeting to meeting to meeting. So I had introduced to her like AI, like you need to have AI note taker in your meetings that actually give you a summary so that you can read in 3 minutes or less, and the action items that you said you're going to do and the action items that I said I was going to do. But anyways, when you kind of talked about staff working in silos and the outdated processes, like that just kind of like, oh yeah, we talked about this, and now I actually had to. So it happens in the secular world, not just in the ministry world.
Oh yeah. Well, and I think that's one of the things that we hear often on the podcast is, oh, the stuff you're talking about isn't just for churches. Like, it applies to all organizations. It applies to anybody who is attempting to lead in a specific direction. And that's what we're about here. So let's dive into the three things, and it will give us a process that we can use to identify these issues and move the ball forward on them, to overcome them. And the first of these is simply to choose one engagement metric that you want to improve. And the reason I say this is because when we said like engagement killers at the beginning of the episode, everybody listening thought of something different. What is engagement to you, right? For the faith formation coordinator, it's maybe how many people come to their meeting at the beginning of the year to talk to all the parents, right? For the liturgy director, what is engagement? Well, maybe it's the number of people that show up on the weekend. For your pastor, what's the engagement? Well, it's the number of people I get to talk to in a given week, or it's the number of people that I see coming through the confessional, or what is engagement for you? And I think that's the first conversation, is to get a little bit clarity on what we mean as a team when we get together and we complain about the lack of engagement with our parishioners. Because when we do that, if you're not saying one thing, you're saying nothing, right? If you're all talking about different things, you're not going to be able to solve those problems. The problems are often solved one at a time. Now, the beauty is, once you solve one thing, you often begin to pave the path for the next problem, right? But you have to pick a single measurable outcome in order to address your engagement issues. So choose one engagement metric that you want to improve. And now that could be, it could be your follow-up rate, right? How many people that send an email get a follow-up within the next 24 hours? It could be volunteer retention. Okay, we had 35 people that were in our classrooms doing religious ed. Coming into the next year, how many of them can we keep? Maybe it's attendance. We want to actually grow attendance on the weekends. What does that look like for us? And how does that translate then into maybe the engagements that we send out? How many emails, how many reminders, how many texts, how many follow-ups, The next one might be just completion rate for next steps, right? We have this event going on. We had this call to action. Hey, guys, go to this web page and start the process, get signed up. How many people did it, right? What this does is it clarifies the target. And when you do that, then it begins to expose the bottlenecks that actually matter in relation to that target. It gives you something concrete to discuss and then take action on. The second step then is to map the workflow that supports that metric. Now, this is what you guys see on the back end, right? What needs to happen? You've chosen your metric, and let's say for our purposes for this conversation, we want to talk about the follow-up rate in the parish, because I really think this is where a lot of people slip through the cracks. Somebody emails about a baptism or a wedding or just a basic question. I want to connect with Father about XYZ. What's the follow-up process for that supports the metric? Because what we want to see then is maybe that gap closed between number of connections lost, right? To see that gap closed. So you have to write out the real process. Who does what and in what order, and kind of identify how that information moves across staff, volunteers, systems. And what that allows you to do, seeing the workflow on paper, makes the friction points obvious, right? If it's one of those things where, well, every email is supposed to go through the front office person and it's all getting caught there. Well, maybe we need to discuss, maybe there's a better way to segment how emails come through, or how they're, sent over to the formation person, the liturgy person, the finance person. Maybe it's good to have one person that they go through. Probably, if that's what you want, it's probably not good to have that one person be the pastor, because they have so many demands on their plate. They need someone that kind of gatekeeps for them, right? So put that workflow on paper, because when you do that, there might be really obvious things that show up like, oh, this is probably not a good system. Or you're going to realize, oh, we have no system. That's also a good realization to have, because then you can begin to put it in place. All right, so that's number 2. Map the workflow that supports the metric that you want to track and improve. And then finally, identify the slowdowns, right? And this is step number 3, to identify the slowdowns and assign someone to fix each one, right? Every single bottleneck, every single step on your workflow needs an owner. And if no one is responsible, like, nothing's going to change, right? So if you realize there's a bottleneck here because everything's designed to go through the pastor, but he doesn't have the time to address every single email, well, then you need to change that workflow a little bit. And you're going to assign that to Ethel at the front office. But the next step of that then is, well, we need to communicate that to everybody. And so you need to assign that step to somebody on the staff to fix that problem, to do that communication. Because clearing these friction points then gives your team a little bit more margin. It gives them margin to really focus on the mission, but it also gives parishioners a clear, unbroken path to move deeper in their engagement with the parish, in their relationship and connection to the parish. So we just need, that's kind of the 3-step overview. And of course, it's like, yes, I understand. It sounds super simplistic, but that's the process. So let's look at that just really briefly again. You got to choose one engagement metric that you want to improve, because what's going to happen is that you're going to have your staff get together and you say, hey, we got this problem with engagement. We really want to address it. Well, everybody's going to want to advocate for their thing. But you need to choose the one engagement metric that you want to improve based on your parish's mission, flowing from the pastor's vision through discernment. Okay. So you gotta have time to talk about that and sort through those things. And then once you've identified that, then you can map that internal workflow that supports the metric. And then finally identify the slowdowns. Where are the bottlenecks in this? Why is it flatlining? Why is it failing? And then you assign people to work through each of those fixes and for each step along the way so that it moves forward. What are your thoughts on this, Thai?
I love the first step in just picking a single measurable outcome. It reminds me of a quote by the famous Chinese philosopher Lao Tzu, who wrote The Art of War. And he said that the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. And I think what it does is, okay, let's have a proof of concept, right? We're trying to do this one thing. Let's prove that it works before we start saying, hey, we've got 30 issues we got to take care of. How do we take care of the 30 issues all at once? Let's start with one. We'll start with one issue and see how this process works out for that one issue. And if it works, let's try it again and see if it works. And then we one by one start taking down all these issues versus, man, I've got this mountain that I got to climb. How am I going to do it in one day?
Yeah, that's it. And it reminds me of how do you eat an elephant?
Yeah.
One bite at a time, right? These things can seem overwhelming. And that's always the temptation. We say, hey, we want to fix engagement. We always think, well, then we need to fix all of it right now. But the truth is that there's a high leverage point when you look at the things that you do or don't do that becomes like the minimum viable change that you can make for the greatest missional impact. And by sitting down and making this a part of the regular rhythm of your work, you're going to create the space where you guys can tackle those one at a time, change the system, and then move the ball forward. And what that does is it has, again, we say all the time, it's got compounding interest over time. And that's a beautiful thing. So we want to lean into that. People always think like, we got to change the entire ministry. We got to change the entire thing. No. Take a step back, focus on one thing at a time, and see how that compounds over time. And with that, I think we can move on to the devil's advocate. Dun dun.
You know, I got into ministry, John, because I wanted to get away from the secular world and corporate America. This all feels too corporate-y. Parishes aren't businesses, and you can't measure discipleship anyway. So why bother building workflows or tracking engagement?
Yeah, I mean, well, I understand that. Like a parish isn't just a business, but it is an organization, right? Parishes run on systems already. Like you already have systems, even if they're undocumented and inconsistent and dependent on whoever happens to be in that job this given year, right? That, however, isn't, I would even go so far as to say that's not a holy approach to running the ministry you've been called into, to stewarding it, right? We have to have a way to get past the chaos and to get into organized sanctity. We want to be organized saints. You even look at the early church. Even though it wasn't necessarily, all the rubrics weren't written out the way they are now, the early church was deeply spiritual, but it was also deeply structured, right? The apostles preached. The deacons served the practical needs of the people. The communities gathered together to support the mission and send people out. That's a system, right? So the church has always been a system. And we have to realize that that's a healthy part of a successful organization, a growing organization. And as for like measuring engagement, you can't measure discipleship in the sense of measuring someone's heart, but you can absolutely measure key moments, key metrics that are identifiers of spiritual health. And that, whether people are going to church. You can measure whether they're showing up at events. You can measure the number of people going through the confessional and the other sacraments, your OCIA. These are all metrics that you can track and measure that we do anyway. These are just, having that desire for growth shows, in my mind, like a zeal for souls that we see in the saints. And we have to get to a point where we're like, yes, we have the zeal, but that we can actively go after it and implement that zeal in a way that's going to bear fruit. And that's what I want to do. So if we refuse to measure movement, we're not going to know whether the parish is actually making disciples or if it's just staying busy. So it's not a corporate strategy. It's responsible stewardship, right? Good systems don't replace ministry, but they do help us to protect it, to build it, and to grow it.
I'm going to say that is the biggest cop-out ever. And I don't want to hear that crap. I don't want to hear that BS. Well, the parish isn't a business. Bull crap. What is a business? It's an organization or individual that provides goods or services. What good or service is more important than your salvation? What is more important than getting you and your family to heaven? And guess what? That's what the church provides. So if you're telling me that you don't want to work in the corporate world, fine. But don't tell me the church isn't a business. We're in the business of saving souls. So if you can't return an email or a phone call to somebody that wants to be a part of your parish, go fly a kite. Get out of my face. I don't want to talk to you. And if you're just listening to these podcasts and not actually doing anything, like, man, I feel for you. I really do. and I know I'm on my soapbox, but don't tell me the parish or the church is not a business. I think there's been a kind of a negative connotation with saying, "Oh, the church is you got to run it like a business." Well, no. If you want to have a successful parish life, a successful ministry, you have to run it like a business. That doesn't mean that it's got to be sterile. That doesn't mean that it didn't have to be filled with compassion and getting, real love for these people. That's not what that means. What it
Yeah.
means, though, is getting your crap in order so that you are successful and you actually get things done and you're not complaining about working for Jesus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I would even say, as a tithing member of my parish, it drives me nuts when I see someone that is paid a full-time salary and they're ministering to 6 people. It
Hmm.
drives me nuts. I minister to 6 people on accident every day, right? My family. Like you have to be intentional, and I want to see you go after and get souls. And if there's a public school, well, we got a Catholic school too, but there's a public school just down the road that's got like hundreds of kids in it that aren't coming to our parish. Go get them. Go get them. And you need a plan to do that. So like, absolutely. Biggest cop out. Don't do that. Get after the work and do it on purpose. And in that spirit, I think we should move on to some actionable steps because, of course, we never want you to walk away from a conversation without having something you can do to take action on it. And so I want to encourage you. We created from this conversation a workflow mapping worksheet that you can sit down and do with your parish staff, with your team. Or if the parish staff isn't on board, you as a ministry leader can do it with your ministry people, with your volunteers. So go to catholicministryprofessionals.com/resources and download the workflow mapping worksheet today. You can block off 30 to 60 minutes with your team, map the current workflow, identify owners, and build the improved version today. All right. And if that gets you excited, don't forget to go to catholicministryprofessionals.com and schedule a discovery call with us, not just to review your findings, but to learn how our leadership alignment workshop can help your team remove the bottlenecks and get on the same page and build a system that supports parish engagement. If you're excited about this, but you think it would be helpful to have someone else in the room to help lead this process, we're your guys. So go to catholicministryprofessionals.com and book a discovery call today. And with that, I want to thank you for listening to this episode. If you found it helpful, don't let it be just another good idea. Text it to a priest or a friend in ministry and start the conversation today. Remember, it takes one saint to transform their parish through their work, and you were made for such a time as this.
And with that, we'll see you in the vineyard.